In professional sports, the distance between the hero's pedestal and the bottom of the abyss is terrifyingly short. It's a world of immense pressure, unimaginable highs, and temptations that can unravel a lifetime of work in a single night. We're drawn to stories of athletic greatness, of buzzer beaters and walk-off home runs. But we're just as fascinated, in a darker way, by the stories of those who had it all and lost it. Stories of talent squandered, of glory turned to infamy. Most of the time, these stories are loud. They dominate headlines for weeks. But some of the most compelling tragedies, and the most profound stories of redemption, happen just outside the brightest spotlights. They are the stories you haven't heard. This is one of them. It's the story of a man who fought for 8 years just to get his shot, a man who wore the uniform of a World Series champion, and a man whose entire world came crashing down because of one catastrophic decision. He was a major league pitcher with $1 million arm and a promising future. But one night of bad decisions would cost him everything. This is the shocking true crime story of how Brandon Puffer went from the pitcher's mound to a prison cell. The dream for Brandon Puffer started where it so often does, on the dusty diamonds of youth in Downey, California. While he loved all sports, and basketball was an early favorite, it was on the pitcher's mound where his future seemed to be written. He was a standout player at Capistrano Valley High School, a kid with a live arm and the kind of raw potential that gets you noticed. In 1994, that notice came from the Minnesota Twins in the Major League Baseball draft. For any young player, getting drafted is the first taste of a dream realized. But the draft is a brutal numbers game. Puffer wasn't a first-round phenom destined for immediate stardom. He was picked in the 27th round. In baseball, a 27th round pick is the definition of a long shot. You're given a chance, but it's a slim one. You're not an investment, you're a lottery ticket. The team hopes you'll pay off, but doesn't really expect you to. The road from a late-round pick to a major league stadium is a grueling, soul-testing journey. It's a tour through sleepy towns on long bus rides, playing for crowds smaller than his high school games. Puffer started his pro journey in 1994 in the Gulf Coast League, the very bottom rung of the minor league ladder. And almost as soon as it began, the dream started to fray. After 2 seasons, the Twins released him. Cut loose, many players would have just packed it in. They'd go home, go to college, and tell stories about the time they were a pro ball player. But Puffer's journey was just beginning. In 1996, the California Angels gave him another shot. 2 seasons later, they released him, too. Then came the Cincinnati Reds in 1998. He clawed his way to Double-A, just 2 steps from the majors, but at the end of the 1999 season, he was a free agent again. The Colorado Rockies signed him, only to release him in May of 2000. 4 organizations had taken a chance on him, and 4 had let him go. The message was clear: you're not what we're looking for. By this point, Puffer was in his mid-20s, an age when prospects are supposed to be establishing themselves, not fighting for their professional lives. He landed in a place that for many is the last stop, independent baseball. He signed with the Somerset Patriots of the Atlantic League, a team with no MLB affiliation. It's a world away from the chartered flights of the big leagues, a league of former prospects and aging vets, all clinging to the hope of one more phone call. While with the Patriots, Puffer reinvented himself, changing his delivery to a sidearm motion that could be brutally effective. And then, in July of 2000, that one last phone call came. The Houston Astros purchased his contract. It was his 5th major league organization. He wasn't a hot prospect anymore. He was a survivor. He spent the next year and a half grinding in the Astros minor league system. Then, on April 17, 2002, 8 years after he was first drafted, the impossible happened. At 26 years old, Brandon Puffer was called up to the major leagues. He described walking into the Houston clubhouse as a surreal moment, seeing the jerseys of legends like Bagwell and Biggio, and then seeing his own. After 8 years of bus rides and being cut, he had finally made it. That season, he became a reliable arm out of the Astros bullpen, pitching in 56 games and proving he belonged. The journeyman had found a home. He spent 2 seasons with Houston before signing with the San Diego Padres for the 2004 season. After 14 games with them, a mid-season trade sent him to a team in the middle of a historic championship run, the Boston Red Sox. What happened next is a strange footnote in baseball history. On September 2, 2004, the Red Sox called Puffer up to the big league club. He got a locker at Fenway Park, suited up, and sat in the bullpen during the game. He was a member of the Boston Red Sox. For one day. The very next day, in a cold roster move, he was designated for assignment. He never threw a single pitch for the team. But that one day on the roster made him part of what came next. The 2004 Red Sox would go on to break an 86-year curse and win the World Series. Months later, team owner John W. Henry decided that anyone who was on the roster at any point that season would get a championship ring. And so, Brandon Puffer, the man released 4 times, received a glorious 18-karat white gold World Series ring. It was the ultimate symbol of success. He'd go on to pitch for the San Francisco Giants in 2005 and sign contracts with other teams, the epitome of perseverance. A true baseball survivor who had climbed the mountain. But at the peak, the air is thin, and the fall is a long way down. By 2008, Brandon Puffer was 32. His major league career had stalled, but he was a respected veteran pitcher for the Frisco Roughriders, the AA affiliate of the Texas Rangers. For a player who'd been to the top, being back in AA could feel like a step back. But the 2008 Roughriders were a team on a mission, dominating their division with an 84-56 record. Puffer was a key veteran leader in that bullpen. The team swept through the first round of the playoffs and were battling in the championship finals. The pressure was electric. For a veteran like Puffer, it was a chance to prove he still had it, to maybe earn one more shot at the show. But the end of a long baseball season also brings a kind of release. Months of discipline and high-stakes competition are suddenly over. For some, that release is a welcome rest. For others, it's a dangerous vacuum. Years later, Puffer reflected on the mindset of a pro athlete. To compete at that level, you have to believe you're 10 feet tall and bulletproof. It's a necessary arrogance on the field, but that armor doesn't work in the world outside the white lines. He also admitted to a lifelong struggle, a void he tried to fill with other things, one of them being alcohol. He described himself as someone who just didn't have an off switch. Where others could have a few drinks to unwind, for him, it could become a runaway train. On September 13, 2008, after a playoff game, that train went completely off the rails. The night started with end-of-season drinking, but as it wore on, Puffer made a series of choices, each one compounding the last. Fueled by alcohol and clouded judgment, he committed an act that would shatter his life and the life of another. He was arrested in Frisco, Texas, found on foot near a woman's residence. The initial charge was horrifying: burglary of a habitation with intent to commit another felony. The details are harrowing, but the legal filing tells a cold, stark story. Puffer, the veteran pitcher, World Series ring owner, husband, and father, had crossed a line from which there was no coming back. In a podcast interview years later, he hauntingly recalled the moments before he went out that night. He said he felt a voice, an instinct, telling him, "Don't do it. This is a bad idea. One choice could really ruin your life." He ignored that voice. He chose to listen to the addiction, the recklessness, the bulletproof athlete who thought he could get away with anything. As he would later say, if someone had offered him a deal, go out drinking, and in exchange, lose your career, your family, your freedom, and all your money, no sane person would ever take it. But in that moment of terrible judgment, he made that trade. The game was over. His life as he knew it was over. All that was left was the fallout. The click of handcuffs, the cold police station, the stark finality of a mugshot. It was a surreal, out-of-body experience. The armor of the professional athlete was gone, stripped away under fluorescent lights. He was no longer Brandon Puffer, MLB pitcher. He was an inmate, a number, a man facing a charge that could send him away for life. The news broke with the speed and brutality that only a story involving a pro athlete and a serious crime can. The Dallas Morning News reported that a Collin County grand jury had indicted him on a first-degree felony, which carried a penalty of up to 99 years or life in prison. Imagine the whiplash. One moment, you're a celebrated athlete signing autographs. The next, your name is attached to words like burglary in newspaper headlines. The public narrative, once written in earned run averages and wins, was now rewritten in the grim vocabulary of the criminal justice system. The fall was swift and merciless. Every achievement and comeback was instantly erased, replaced by the single, ugly fact of his arrest. His career wasn't just over, it was incinerated. The phone calls that once came from agents and GMs were replaced by calls from lawyers. The locker room camaraderie vanished, replaced by the isolating silence of a defendant. He had spent his adult life inside the bubble of pro baseball, a world with its own rules and support systems. Now, he was cast out. He had to face his family, his wife and children, and explain the inexplicable, confronting the public shame he had brought upon them. This wasn't a bad inning he could bounce back from. This was a life-altering catastrophe of his own making. The legal process ground forward, an impersonal machine now in control of his destiny. For a man used to the clear-cut results of a baseball game, the slow pace of the justice system must have been its own form of torture. He couldn't throw a perfect pitch to get himself out of this jam. The man who wore a World Series ring was now fighting to stay out of a prison cell. In 2009, Brandon Puffer walked into a Collin County courtroom to stand trial. The proceedings lasted 3 days, with his worst moment examined from every possible angle under the cold gaze of the law. The prosecution laid out its case, detailing the events of that September night. Puffer's defense fought back, calling character witnesses. He had earned respect during his long career, and in a powerful statement of support, he received backing from a titan of Texas baseball, the legendary Nolan Ryan. It was a reminder of the Brandon Puffer that existed before the incident, the grinder, the survivor, the teammate. But a trial isn't about your entire life, it's about your actions on a specific day. As the jury filed out to deliberate, Puffer was left to wait. He had faced down Barry Bonds with the bases loaded, but that pressure was nothing compared to this. Then, the jury returned. The verdict, guilty. Guilty of burglary of a habitation. In that moment, any last shred of hope was extinguished. He was no longer just an accused man, he was a convicted felon. The judge then handed down the sentence, 5 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. 5 years. In the life of a pro athlete, that's an eternity. It is the definitive end of a career. It is a vast expanse of time to be separated from your family, and everything you've ever known. The system showed its cruelty immediately. He was denied the chance to say a proper goodbye to his family. There was no final hug, no moment of closure. He was processed, taken from the courtroom, and sent to the notorious Huntsville prison. The roar of a stadium crowd was replaced by the clanging of steel doors. Sitting in that cell, the full weight of his actions came crashing down. Every choice he made that night had led him here. He had traded a World Series ring for a prison sentence. He had traded the respect of his peers for the anonymity of a number. He had traded his freedom for a cage. It was the bottom, a place so deep and dark it seemed impossible that any light could ever get in. The fall was complete. The story could have ended there. A talented athlete makes a terrible mistake and fades into obscurity, a cautionary tale whispered in clubhouses. But what happens when a man who has lost everything decides to face the person he has become? If you find stories of accountability and the difficult road to redemption compelling, take a moment to subscribe. The hardest part of Brandon Puffer's story was over, but the most important part was just beginning. Prison is designed to break you. It's a world of monotonous routine and isolation that strips you of your identity. For Brandon Puffer, entering the Texas prison system was the ultimate shock. His career stats, his 5.09 ERA, none of it mattered here. He was at ground zero. He could have become bitter. He could have blamed the system, the circumstances, anyone but himself. Instead, Puffer chose a different path, radical accountability. He has said that going to prison, as terrible as it was, 100% saved his life. It was the catastrophic event that finally forced him to confront his demons. He began to understand that his purpose was far greater than just being Brandon Puffer, the baseball player. It was in that place of utter brokenness that he began to rebuild from the inside out, with his faith becoming his anchor. He served over 3 years of his 5-year sentence, and was granted parole in 2011. When he walked out, he was starting from scratch. The baseball money was gone. His reputation was in tatters. He was a convicted felon, a label that closes countless doors. His first job wasn't in sports, it was a humble maintenance job. It was a world away from the life he'd known, but it was an honest living, a first step on a long road. As he worked to restore his own life, he began to realize his story, as painful as it was, could be a powerful tool. He knew the pressures of pro sports, the temptations of fame, and the devastating consequences of poor choices. He started sharing his story. He wasn't proud of what he did, but he refused to hide from it. He spoke to young athletes and teams, offering his life as a cautionary tale. He wrote a book with the painfully honest title, From the Bullpen to the State Pen. He found that in sharing his shame, he could also share a story of hope. He spoke about the 10-foot-tall and bulletproof mindset that gets athletes into trouble, and the conscious choice he had to make every day to not let his past define him. His message was one of accountability, warning young players about the dangers of ignoring the small voice that tells you when you're making a bad decision. Eventually, the road led him back to the game he loved. He and a friend, another former pro player named Brian Gordon, co-founded a baseball training organization in Texas called GPS Legends. The name stands for guiding players successfully. Now, instead of taking the mound himself, he mentors the next generation, teaching them not just mechanics, but the importance of character and decision-making. He had once worried in his cell that he would never be a part of baseball again, but now he was not only back in the game, but was also a husband and a father with a restored family. His purpose had become clear. The 15 years in professional baseball was the setup. The fall was the crucible. And this new life, as a coach, mentor, and speaker, was the payoff. He was using the worst moment of his life to prevent others from making the same mistake. The story of Brandon Puffer is a journey from the pinnacle of professional sports, a World Series ring, to the absolute depths of a prison cell. He is a man who had his dream in his grasp, threw it all away in one night of alcohol-fueled recklessness, and paid an immense price. His actions caused real harm, and his conviction was a just consequence. But his story doesn't end with the guilty verdict. It continues in the quiet, difficult work of rebuilding a life from the ashes. It's found in his willingness to stand before young athletes and expose his deepest shames in the hope that it might save one of them from a similar fate. His journey explores the complicated space of a deeply flawed human being who, after a catastrophic fall, chooses the difficult path of accountability and service. Brandon Puffer's life is a testament that our worst moments don't have to be our last. Redemption isn't about erasing the past, but about using its painful lessons to build a better future. His is a true crime story, but it is also, improbably, a story of hope, asking the question, what does a second chance really look like? What happens after the fall? We are fascinated by stories of downfall, of talent squandered and glory turned to infamy. We watch as heroes are knocked from their pedestals. But the story often ends there, with the finality of a guilty verdict or a career incinerated. What we don't always get to see is what comes next. What does it look like to lose everything and have to start over? What does a second chance really look like? This is a story about the day after the worst day of your life. It's about a man who stood on a major league mound, wore a World Series ring, and then found himself in a prison cell. He had it all, lost it in a single night of catastrophic decisions, and paid an immense price. But his story didn't end with the clang of a jail door. It continued in the quiet, brutal work of rebuilding a life from the ashes, and it asks a profound question: can our worst moments become our greatest teachers? From a World Series ring to a 5-year prison sentence, Brandon Puffer's fall from grace was swift and total. But what happens when a man who has lost everything decides to confront the person he's become? This is the second half of the Brandon Puffer story, a journey not of crime, but of consequence, accountability, and the improbable search for redemption. In 2009, Brandon Puffer, former Major League pitcher, walked into a Collin County courtroom. After a 3-day trial, where even a character witness statement from baseball legend Nolan Ryan couldn't erase the facts of the case, the jury delivered its verdict: guilty of burglary of a habitation. Then came the sentence: 5 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. In the life of a professional athlete, 5 years is an eternity. It is the definitive, irreversible end of a career. For Puffer, the cruelty of the system was immediate. He recalls being put in handcuffs and asking if he could say goodbye to his father. The answer was no. He was stripped of his clothes, put into an inmate's uniform, and placed in a cell. He vividly remembers hearing the metallic clink of the lock, a sound that felt like a scene from a movie, confirming his new reality. The man who once earned a living on the world's biggest athletic stages, who had faced down the best hitters on the planet, was now just a number. The roar of the crowd was replaced by the suffocating silence of a prison cell. Every choice he made on that fateful September night in 2008 had led him here. He had traded the prestige of a World Series ring for a prison sentence, fame for a future defined by his worst mistake. It was the absolute bottom, a place so deep it seemed impossible any light could ever get in. The fall was complete. Prison is designed to strip away identity and break the human spirit. The man who entered the notorious Huntsville prison was no longer Brandon Puffer, the baseball player. His career stats, his accolades, none of it mattered. He was at ground zero. He could have surrendered to bitterness or blamed his circumstances. Instead, Puffer made a different choice: radical accountability. He would later say that going to prison, as horrific as it was, 100% saved his life. For years, he had tried to fill a void with the fleeting highs of athletic success and alcohol. He described himself as a person without an off switch. The catastrophic shock of his incarceration finally forced him to confront the man he had become, separate from his athletic identity. In that place of utter brokenness, Puffer began to rebuild from the inside out. He has spoken about how his prayers changed. Before the verdict, he prayed to be saved from prison. After he was sentenced, his prayer became different. "Okay, God, here I am. Help to use me any way you can in this." Faith became his anchor, and he began to understand that his purpose was far greater than just throwing a baseball. He chose to see his time not just as punishment, but as preparation for a new life. After serving more than 3 years of his sentence, Brandon Puffer was granted parole and walked out of prison in 2011. He was starting over from nothing. The money he had earned in his 15-year professional baseball career was gone, spent on legal fees and other responsibilities. He walked out with a Bible, some hygiene products, and the clothes on his back, all contained in a small mesh bag. He was now a convicted felon, a label that closes countless doors to employment and housing. His reputation was in tatters. His first job wasn't in sports or any glamorous field. It was a humble maintenance job. It was a world away from the chartered flights and big league clubhouses he had once known, but it was an honest living. It was the first step on a long, arduous road back. Puffer had to confront the reality that the life he knew was gone forever. But in its place was a chance to build something new, something more meaningful. This period was about swallowing his pride, embracing humility, and taking the first small, crucial steps toward a different future. As he slowly worked to put his own life back together, Puffer began to realize that his painful story could be a powerful tool. He intimately understood the pressures of professional sports, the 10-foot-tall and bulletproof mindset that can lead athletes to ruin, and the devastating consequences of a single bad choice. He decided to stop hiding from his past and instead use it to help others. He started sharing his story, speaking to young athletes, teams, and organizations. He wrote a book with the painfully direct title, From the Bullpen to the State Pen, laying bare his journey from triumph to tribulation. His message was not one of excuses, but of stark accountability. He spoke about the small voice of instinct he ignored on the night of his arrest, the one that warned him he was about to make a life-ruining decision. In sharing his deepest shame, he found a new purpose: to serve as a living cautionary tale, hoping to prevent another young person from making the same trade he did, trading a lifetime of work for one night of recklessness. The road of redemption eventually led Brandon Puffer back to the game he loved, but in a completely new capacity. Along with a friend and fellow former pro, Brian Gordon, he co-founded a baseball training organization in Texas called GPS Legends. The name is an acronym for their mission: guiding players successfully. The man who once worried in his cell that he would never be part of baseball again was now back on the diamond. Instead of taking the mound himself, he was now a coach and mentor, teaching the next generation not just pitching mechanics, but the critical importance of character, faith, and decision-making off the field. His life had come full circle, but with a profound shift in perspective. His 15-year baseball career was the setup. His catastrophic fall was the crucible. And this new life, as a coach, speaker, husband, and father with a restored family, was the payoff. He had finally found a sense of peace and purpose that had eluded him even at the pinnacle of his athletic career. The story of Brandon Puffer is a journey to the absolute depths of a prison cell and back. It's a testament that a single, terrible mistake does not have to be the final chapter. His actions caused real harm, and the consequences were severe and just. But the narrative did not end with his conviction. It continues in his daily choice to live a life of accountability, service, and faith. It's found in his willingness to stand before young athletes and use his own story to illuminate the dangers they face. Brandon Puffer's journey is a powerful chronicle of what a second chance can look like. It proves that redemption isn't about erasing the past, but about finding the courage to own its painful lessons and use them to build a better, more purposeful future.